Look, I really like One Piece, okay? And I like Zoro, but I'm not the type to shy away from criticizing both of them, especially when it comes to our moss-haired friend and his frankly terrible lineup of opponents post-time skip. I do it on my streams all the time. And while I'd love for my enjoyment of the story to always be sunshine and rainbows, I think it's important to look at things with a critical eye in order to learn what works and what doesn't, and at least for me, the criticism does come from a good place. I still love the story and want it to do well. However, there are also times when I feel like I've been quick to judge recent things in the story as negative, especially major events, before I've had a chance to fully digest the writing. Sometimes I fear that collectively, we can tunnel vision on the negative aspects on the what could have beens, where we lose sight of the positives and in turn, what's been done right. In my case, I nearly missed the point entirely. This script originally started as a critique of King, about how he didn't satisfy my expectations of the opponent that should cap off an entire saga for Zoro, about how King didn't develop enough upon Zoro's themes and his quest to become the world's greatest swordsman. And yet, despite my initial pessimism, the more I read into the relationship and interactions between these two characters, however short and passive-aggressive they may have been, the more I came to understand what Oda was trying to do with King and what he was trying to call back to when he wrote this character. The more I read, the more I came to appreciate his addition to the story, and the more I realized that Zoro vs. King is seriously misunderstood. Here's the deal. We can't fully understand why this guy is so great until we talk about what his fight meant for Zoro. And so, to understand King, first we need to talk about Queen. Nah, I feel as though Queena's purpose in Zoro's backstory is lost on part of the OP community. It's not as uncommon to see it written off as a flat-out bad flashback. All too often, I see people misinterpret Queena's death due in no small part to false rumors, which I'll talk about in a bit. And granted, it's a bit basic, it's not the best backstory ever, but keep in mind it's also the first proper flashback we get for a Straw Hat in the story. Luffy's childhood with Shanks was where the manga began chronologically, but the first time the story sequence breaks and takes us back 10 years is with Zoro. This was pre-Buggy, mind you. It was way too early in the story to deliver a multi-chapter drama filled with death and tragedy and betrayal and political factions and ancient civilizations and blah 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 blah. No. Up until this point, this story was just about a happy-go-lucky kid with wacky powers who wanted to become Pirate King because some homeless dude told him pirates are cool a long time ago. Zoro, to a degree, was just a play on the cool, edgy swordsman trope where this gullible musclehead wanted to be the best knife enthusiast so bad that he uses more swords than he has hands. But that's only on a surface level. This subversion, like Luffy's rubber powers, are not what sold us on Zoro as a character. It wasn't the cool factor, or the humor of it, or the fight with Captain Morgan. It was the backstory. We were sold on Zoro's resolve to be the best, in part due to his backstory, much like how we're invested in Luffy's goal and his attachment to the Straw Hat itself solely because of the events we're shown in Chapter 1. Without this backstory, Zoro would just be some musclehead. Without this backstory, his motivations and his dream wouldn't really matter to us at all. But they do, and it's all because of Kuina. No jokes for a second, this is a heavy subject matter and I want to be 100% serious for a minute. I have a question. What do you think was the cause of Queena's death? Was it A, falling down the stairs, or B, suicide? If you answered B, then you are likely victim to a false rumor about the supposedly hidden context in Zoro's backstory that only Japanese readers are supposed to recognize. The ultimate cope for anyone that doesn't believe Kuina could have died to a set of stairs. Time and time again over the years I'd been told that in Japan, falling down the stairs is a euphemism for committing suicide. This is something I've seen people parrot over and over and over without verifying if this is actually true. I'm here to tell all of you that it's not. It is not a euphemism for any form of self-harm, as a matter of fact, anywhere in Japan. Neither my wife nor her friends, all of whom are native Japanese readers of One Piece, have ever heard of such a thing, nor have they ever got the impression from the Zoro flashback that Kuina falling down the stairs was a metaphor for something else. When I attempted to Google the answers just to make sure, I couldn't find anything confirming the euphemism either. What I did find was a thread on Reddit, with the top post claiming that it's fake, and that apparently this was a nonsense rumor started on the One Piece subreddit itself. Just goes to show how easily misinformation can spread. Translation barriers have a ton of power on the internet, man. Sometimes all you gotta do is attach "in Japan" or "Oda once said" to the front of a completely bullshit statement, and at least some people out there will believe it, and then tell it to other people, who then tell it to other people, until all of us are just repeating some untrue nonsense. And whether it was out of an innocent fan desire for more depth, Zoro's backstory took a hit from this the hardest among the Straw Hats, because the Queen of Euphemism rumor is by far one of the most popular ones I've seen, and it's led to a fundamental misunderstanding of the actual reason Kuina died. She died by complete accident. There is no metaphor here. Some people will say she didn't die or something, and maybe it's Tashigi, and okay, fine, but until Oda reveals that twist, Kuina actually fell down the stairs and died, and Kuina was robbed of her life by the will of the heavens, by fate, and by death itself. In my opinion, her death is supposed to represent how fragile strength and life by extension really is. No matter how strong you are, whether you're the best or not, death comes for all of us. Didn't expect to get existential on a Zoro video, but here we are. Anyway, Kuina was Zoro's Mihawk before Mihawk. In fact, Kuina shared Zoro's dream to become the world's greatest swordsman. She was this untouchable, unbeatable figure standing in his way. No matter how strong he thought he was, she was always able to beat him. However, while Zoro was frustrated with his weakness, she was also burdened by her own. Kuina believed that she would never become the strongest swordsman because of being a woman, because of characteristics beyond her control. She believed that fate had prevented her from achieving her dream. Zoro believed none of that mattered and that you can become the best simply if you worked hard enough. On one hand, we have a child prodigy with natural talent who believes they are limited by fate. On the other, we have a competitive overachiever who works incredibly hard to conquer fate. They complement each other's nature, and so Zoro, being the competitive one, made a promise with her. They share the same dream, so one day they should fight each other for the title. Despite Kuina being the stronger swordsman, Zoro had the personal and spiritual strength to keep her from giving up too soon. He treated her as his equal, as a rival, and gave her a newfound hope in her dream, surely a major turning point in her life's journey. And then she died. The person who Zoro was striving so hard to beat, the person who he deeply admired, died suddenly and without warning in a completely random, inconsequential way. Zoro was suddenly faced with an even greater, more terrifying opponent than Kuina, someone who beat her before he could, and someone who would eventually come for him as well: death. Her dream was cut short by the same forces she felt imprisoned by, forces beyond her control. Every other martyr character in flashbacks tends to die in some grand fashion, often willfully choosing to die in order to save the life of another, and typically pass on their will in the process. Kuina didn't really have that. She wasn't saving anyone from anything. Her death didn't serve some greater purpose. She didn't leave behind any final impactful words for Zoro. No, just the night before she died, Kuina and Zoro made a promise together that now could no longer be fulfilled. And the worst part is, there's no one we can blame this on. Unlike most other backstories in One Piece, this one has no villain. There's no physical bad guy in this entire thing. The driving force of this event in Zoro's life and the force behind Kuina's life ending is not a physical person, but a conceptual one: Death himself. The villain of his flashback is the Grim Reaper. What did Zoro say after Kuina died? That he'll become such a master swordsman that his name will be known even in heaven. Not too far off in concept from "a man only dies when he's forgotten." He wants his name to reach heaven, where even after he dies, his legacy as the greatest will live on forever. But this is not simply a selfish goal. He isn't striving for the top out of some blind pursuit of strength. It's to avenge the death of his friend, to make her death have a purpose. Kuina was robbed of her dream. While other characters got to pursue their own and leave their work behind for the next generation, Kuina never even got the chance to start. And so, Two-Sword Zoro became Three-Sword Zoro. He took it upon himself to carry on her dream, to conquer death, and bring her sword with him on his journey to be the strongest, so that when he finally accomplishes that goal, so does she. So that even in death, Kuina lives. Her sword, the Wado Ichimonji, is translated as the straight path to harmony, an apt description of Zoro's unwavering resolve towards achieving the dream harmoniously shared between these two characters. When Zoro and Mihawk eventually fight for the title, through this sword, Kuina will be there fighting with him. He's bringing her along for the journey. and all of that is communicated in so few panels, but the impact it has on us makes Zoro an extremely easy character to root for, because what drives him is not a selfish goal to become the best, but a selfless desire to fulfill the wishes of a dearly departed friend. Like Zoro said, he wants to become so strong that not even death can stop him, that until he achieves his goal, the Grim Reaper won't be able to take his life away. In the end, Zoro's backstory and his goal are indirectly a revenge plot against the course of nature, against the circle of life, and against the wheel of fate, but most importantly, against death, which is why he has all of these allusions to being the king of hell and Ashura, Grim Reaper, etc. The first time we meet the guy, he's on death row. He's made references to the gates of Hades and has moves named Demon Cutter and Dead Man's Game. His whole deal, at least thematically, is being a demon, cutting monsters and facing death head on. Cursed blades, or as Zoro calls them, problem children, are simply blades that are the best at killing, and he's conquered every cursed blade he has touched. In Logtown, he gets a cursed sword after meeting a Quina lookalike. In Thriller Bark, he got one from fighting the ghost of Queena's ancestor. And in Wano, he acquires another sword, Enma, from the homeland of Queena's family. Taking it even further, Enma is named after the king of hell in Shinto and Buddhism. And while in the West we consider the devil to be the king of hell and death to be a skeleton in a cloak, in the East, Enma is both the king of hell and the representation of death. They are not separate. In other words, Zoro's newest sword is basically named after death himself. And Zoro uses this sword to become the king of hell, at least symbolically. The list goes on, and it's all because of this moment right here. So how in the world does this all relate to King? Well, allow me to describe King for a bit and see if you notice any similar themes here. King, formerly named Albert, is a man who was hunted and whose family and friends were probably killed all because of their race. King was subjected to a horrible childhood purely because of circumstances beyond his control. But whereas Kuina believed she was inferior because of being born a woman, King, at least on the surface, believed that he was superior because he was a Lunarian. King is thought to be invincible, unbeatable. He makes grand statements to Zoro about his race, about how, because he's a Lunarian, no matter how hard Zoro works, he won't be able to win. And yet, his past experiences have left him self-conscious about that very same trait. King chooses to hide his face at all times and kills any and all who know about his identity. In other words, his greatest strength is also his greatest insecurity. In fact, there's an underlying running theme among Zoro's opponents of being insanely strong or talented, but having some sort of insecurity or fault holding them back. Kaku is a cipher pole prodigy, a regular badass, but has an obtrusively large nose, and his new devil fruit power was really funny looking, in heavy contrast with the image he likes to maintain, which ultimately made him very self-conscious. Monet brought up yet again the whole theme of going easy on her because she's a woman. Pika was really tough looking, but had an incredibly high-pitched voice that he was ashamed of. And now we have King, a man who changed his name and hides his face because he doesn't want the world to know his identity. This sort of thing even extends into Egghead Island, with S-Hawk having that extra little bit of humanity in comparison to the person he's supposed to be imitating. I guess that's what makes Mihawk the ultimate opponent for Zoro, isn't it? Since he lacks any obvious Achilles heel. He's cold, sharp, and unwavering, not unlike a sword itself. Similarly, by design, King and the Lunarians by extension are meant to emulate some kind of biblical angel. That much is clear by this point. But I think it's not just any angel, but the concept of a fallen angel that's being referenced here. I've spoken ad nauseum on this channel about all the visual connections between King and Lucifer, a fallen seraphim from the Bible who became the devil, that fall from grace resulting partially due to insecurity and hubris, and from what I can tell, there's all this angel, devil, and death symbolism we see with King and his physical design, which, by the way, is in and of itself an overt reference to Angel of Retribution by Judas Priest. So for King specifically, there's plenty of possible sources of inspiration, another being possibly Azrael, the Angel of Death, who is also often depicted in all black with black wings. Once again, in Eastern cultures, death and the King of Hell or the devil or whatever are often equated with each other. So the theme is prevalent here. When Big Mom tried invading Wano, who was sent to take them out? King. When Kaido killed Orochi on the live stage, who handed him the executioner's sword? King. So Zoro is basically fighting the visage of death here, the right-hand man to the King of Oni, and he manages to defeat him using a sword, very clearly cursed, explicitly named after the King of Hell. Zoro starts the Wano Arc after being accused of a crime and forced to commit harakiri. He fights against a man, literally named Killer, who fights him using scythes, and despite taking a scythe to the body, Zoro just smirks at death and comes out on top. He's later spurred into anger by the public execution of a friend who died in the same manner that Zoro was supposed to die back in the beginning of the story, and he ultimately fights a caricature of the Angel of Death, all in defense of Kuina's ancestral home. This fight is not about becoming the greatest swordsman. It is the culmination of Zoro's struggles against the very enemy that claimed Kuina's life: death, fate, and the forces of nature, perfectly represented by a pirate crew themed around the animal kingdom. And suddenly, this panel with the Grim Reaper here makes a lot more sense, at least thematically. You might think, well, if only Oda put it that way, if only he made it clear and made that Kuina connection for us. But the thing is, he did, and I haven't given him enough credit in the past for doing that, because part of the way into the fight with King, Zoro thinks back to his past. He thinks back to the day Kuina died and when he decided to take her sword. He remembers another conversation back with Sukiyaki where he learned that Enma, his brand new sword, was made by the same person who made the Wado Ichimonji, Shimotsuki Kozaburo, Kuina's grandfather. His first thought of Kozaburo is not of their conversation, but rather of the day he died and of Kuina crying at the funeral. Only after which, we see a scene where Kozaburo gives Zoro his first two swords and explains to him that swords are tools of death, and a master swordsman is one who controls that tool, not the other way around. He explains that there's no such thing as cursed swords, only quality swords, which can only be wielded by quality swordsmen. And he finishes by telling us that he once made a sword, his greatest creation ever, his masterpiece, named after the king of hell. Surely, a sword only a true master of the blade can tame. Zoro's growth happens in this fight when he begins to tame Enma and literally conquer death. Because the moment this realization hits him and he understands that this blade in front of him is testing his swordsmanship, Zoro does something special. He officially unlocks and taps into Conqueror's Haki, the Haki of the Supreme King. He tames Enma and acquires the resolve to fulfill his promise, not only to his captain, but to his best friend. Zoro's ascension towards becoming the best truly picked up here. So you intend to be a king? A fitting question coming from this man, but not just for all the obvious reasons. Sure, his name is King, a name he wears with pride, but ultimately, it was only granted to him by a much more powerful dragon. Every king in One Piece has to answer to a dragon. But what about the king of swordsmen? Not the greatest swordsman, the king, Shimotsuki Ryuma, Zoro's lookalike, and most importantly, Kuina's ancestor, the likely reason she is so naturally gifted with the blade. Ryuma is a man who accomplished Zoro's dream. His name reached the heavens, so much so that he's still well known and spoken of hundreds of years after his death. I mean, Zoro literally had to fight his corpse. Ryuma, back in his original manga, Monsters, was a wandering swordsman who saves a town from a terrifying dragon, and this dragon's power was abused by a guy that looks like Mihawk. Not really any other way to put it. He looks like Mihawk. Throughout the manga, Ryuma keeps hearing rumors around town about some impressive master swordsman named King. And this King guy seemed to have such a reputation that Ryuma hoped he could fight him one day. The irony of this is revealed at the end, where after he kills the dragon and defeats this douchebag, we find out that Ryuma himself is the nameless swordsman everyone keeps calling the King, and he's blissfully unaware that the man he's hoping to meet and fight is actually himself. The manga leaves us by telling us that Ryuma, the King, is a man who carries the world's greatest warrior's soul. So when I look back at One Piece and this fight in particular, certain details now have a lot more impact. We have a character literally called King who serves a massive dragon. Zoro fights against both using two swords made by Ryuma's ancestor. Through honing his warrior soul and his fighting spirit, he acquires Conqueror's Haki and strives for the level of King himself. King conjures up a massive dragon, and Zoro cuts that dragon and defeats King, paralleling the Ryuma panel and making his evolution into a conqueror complete. With this fight, Zoro took one step closer to becoming a king himself. By defeating an angel and conquering death, Zoro took one step closer to his name reaching heaven. And maybe this was also a step closer to Shimotsuki Kuina's name living on in legend alongside his own, just like Shimotsuki Ryuma did long before them. And that's why this fight is so damn cool. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Sorry I didn't have as many jokes this time, but I felt like this one called for a more serious approach. Before you go, if you liked the discussion today, make sure to like and subscribe to keep the music alive. And with that, I'm out. See you next time.